Hello and welcome to part 2 of the sales director problem. So let's get up our pseudocode from the previous video. And there we go. And let's get programming. So first thing I need to do is I'm going to declare the number of staff and I'm going to provide it with an input from the user. So please enter the number of sales staff. Now, if I ask the user that question, it's going to come back as a string, so I need to cast it into an integer because we're getting numbers there. The next thing I'll do is I'll declare my array. Now, in Python, we don't use arrays, we use lists, which are pretty much identical, and we declare it like that. So that is going to create a list, and it's blank at the moment, and we use square brackets for lists in Python. Then what I'll do is I'll declare my minimum as a high number like I did before. I've got a mean there as well. Mean equals 0. I've got a count value which equals 0 as well. And what else have we got? Total equals 0. And I think that is it for my variables. Now I like to keep things neat and I like to comment my code as I go. So there's my variables. Got them all created and happy, ready to go. So the next thing I need to do now is a loop. So I say for I in range open brackets num staff. Now what that's going to do is that's going to go up to the number of staff that I've got, and what I'll do is I'll just show you exactly what is printed, because it's always good as a computer scientist to check exactly what your iteration statement is doing. So number of sales staff in this example was 6. And there I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Notice how we don't start from 1 anymore inside here, which is perfectly fine. We can go from 0 to 5, that's all right. So let's output this then. So now what we need to do is we need to ask the person to enter the number or the sales data for the staff. So enter sales data for staff member, comma, I. Now if I put comma I there, it'll output 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now it won't read very well if it says enter sales data for staff 0, will it? So I'm just going to put a +1 there. And now if you have a look at it again, enter 6 there. It's going to do that every time for all 6 employees, which is good. Now what I need to do is I just need to get the user to enter it into my list. So my list. Now with a list in Python, it has a predefined function with it called append, and that's how we enter data into our array. And I'm going to say input and just leave the brackets like this, but remember we need it to take in an input as an integer. Now be careful with the number of brackets here. I think that's the right number of brackets. So I've opened 1 bracket, 2 bracket, 3 brackets. I've closed 1 bracket, 2 brackets, 3 brackets. And again, you know, no shame in testing as we go. So you'll notice this is unindented, so it's not inside my for loop, it's outside. And that's how we end for loops in Python. We use our indentation. There's no next I in this. So let's have a look at the number of staff. So we've got 6 sales staff, and it was 45, 55, 65, 65, 10, and 60. So you can see now, here is my list, and it contains all of my values separated by a comma. Absolutely perfect. Good work so far. Now inside here, as I append them or as I add them in, I need to add them to the total. Total plus my list at the position of I. And again, nothing wrong in saying total is, comma, total. Again, test as we go, very important. 6 sales staff, 45, 55, 65, 65, 10 and 60. Total is 300. Perfect. So it's adding up the total as we go. And now, I suppose, I don't need to output the total, but I could say mean is, comma, mean equals total divided by num staff. So this would produce the mean for me. I take my total variable up there, I divide it by the number of staff that I've got, and that will produce the mean for me. So let's see if we get the same as the exam question then. 6. And there you go. So it's 50, which is exactly what the question said, so that's a good sign. The only thing I need to do is the minimum value. So in here, I'll say if the thing that you just entered, my list at the position of I, is less than the min value, don't forget your colon, then the min value is set to my list at the position of I. Calculations for the min value, adding data to the list, and calculating the total. That's what we've done so far. So the mean is, that's fine, we print the mean out, print the min value is, and min. So I don't need to print my entire list out. I've got my mean calculations here. So just take a pause for a second there, just to look at what we've done. Declared all our variables, created a for loop that will run to the number of staff that we've got, asked them to enter one by one and store it in the list, calculate the total, running total as we go, calculate the minimum value using a selection statement. Outside of the loop, I've got a mean calculation, so once the total has been populated after it's finished looping, then work out the mean. So far, so good. Now the next thing, once I've calculated the mean, I need to do exactly the same again. Range up to num staff. So now is my second loop. Because I know the mean now, I can use my selection statement again to say, if the thing in my list, if the element in my list at the position of I, as I go up one by one, from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if that's less than the mean value that I've got, colon, it should automatically indent me, then print out, so print instead of output, value below mean, comma, my list this time, square brackets instead of rounded brackets in Python. And we need to make a count variable, count equals count plus 1. Okay, so there you go, count calculation in there, that's going to output. And the only thing that I've got left really is I need to print out total number of values below the mean is, comma, count. Wonderful. Have I included everything? That is a great question. Just look as well at, I'll zoom out for a second, just look at how I've structured my code as well. So you can see the first for loop does a couple of things, asks the user to input into the list, calculates the total, calculates the min value. Then I've got the calculation of the mean outside of the first loop. Once I've calculated the mean, I create a second loop to go through my list one by one to compare it to the mean value. And then I print it out if it's below the mean, and also add 1 to the count every time I find a value that is below a value in my list. And then I've got my 3 output statements, and all we need to do is test this using the test data to make sure that all is working. So let's do that. Enter the number of sales staff. So the test data provided with 6, 45, 55, 65, 65, 10, and 60. So it says value below the mean is 45, value below the mean is 10, the mean is 50, the minimum value is 10, and the total number of values below the mean is 2. Absolutely perfect. That matches completely what we saw in the pseudocode. So have a look between our code now and the pseudocode and see if you can spot the similarities between them. The main things to point out is in Python we use print statements, in pseudocode we use outputs, we use this for range function. In Python, default values start at 0 when I use I here, and our square brackets replace our rounded brackets when we're moving between arrays and lists. The only difference between an array and a list is that a list can hold multiple data types, whereas an array is of one data type only. So I hope you found that useful. Feel free to write the code yourself, have a play around with it, see if you can break it. Trial and error is the best way to learn when you're programming. So join me in the next one for another Triple P.